Before we get started, I want to ask you one question. Are you exhausted from hiding behind walls of self protection and a phony, inauthentic smile? I was too. I felt like I was dying inside, but I'm so grateful that I discovered a pathway to healing and a true, authentic smile that radiates from within. And now I help others find theirs too. If you want to learn more, check out our community at themindsetschool.net, where right now, as a monthly VIP founder, we're offering a 30-day free subscription to the community. Head over to themindsetschool.net. Again, themindsetschool.net. I will pop a coupon in the show notes for you. Today on the Mindset School podcast, I have the amazing privilege of talking with Cliff Ravenscraft. Cliff hosted one of the first 100 podcasts ever, and since has had 48 different podcasts, over 4,700 episodes. He is known as the Mindset Answer Man and has helped people with their businesses such as Amy Porterfield and Pat Flynn. Listen in as he shares his story of courage to move toward his own dream, even when it meant giving up everything that so many others dream of. Hey friends, welcome to the Mindset School podcast with Peggy Easterling, where we learn to smile authentically from the inside out. Hello, Cliff Ravenscraft. How are you today?
Peggy, I have never been better. It gets better every single minute of the day. And I warn you, I've just drank a caffeinated beverage and I just got back from the gym. So I'm hyped up and ready to go.
Awesome. All right. My people are going to love that because they're going to love what you have to tell them today. I went through your Free the Dream course and it was completely amazing. And I love the things that you have to offer the world right now. Can you share a little bit about what you have to offer and tell us about how we can change our minds and start to begin dreaming again?
Sure. First and foremost, I think it's important to know just a little bit about why Free the Dream was created. So for me, I've always had a heart and a desire to be of service to others at the highest level. And I lived most of my life all the way up until 2008 as a employee. And I really never thought of myself as anything other than that, except for the fact that after working in a family-run insurance agency owned by my mom and dad that was started by my grandfather in 1937, after more than a decade of working with them, I discovered the hobby of podcasting. My wife and I were watching a television show, Lost, and I had noticed that there were a bunch of other podcasts about this TV show. And I started listening to them every single week. And I'm like, oh man, this is great. And I was blogging about my theories about what was going on in this television show. And my blog had been going since 1996. About 300 people around the world had been reading it at this point. And this was about 9 years into my blogging. I had an audience of 300. And I decided to create an audio piece of feedback, a 3-minute audio file sharing what I called the Thomas theory. And it was my overall theory about that explains all of the mystery in this secular television show. I had screen captures to back it up and all of these different things. And I blogged about it, but I knew only about 300 people would read this, and not everybody was interested in Lost. So probably about 30 people would see this and have somewhat of an interest. But I thought if I could get my voice into these people's podcasts about the television show, I would reach an audience. So I recorded a 3.5-minute audio file, sent it to Hawaii to Ryan and Jen Azawa. They played it in their podcast called The Transmission, and my website got shut down. Meaning that what happened was I logged in one day and it said bandwidth exceeded, contact support. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? And it turns out that Entertainment Weekly, or EW.com, heard my voice, published an article on their website about it, and linked millions of people to my little blog in Northern Kentucky that nobody really had ever heard of before. I got all of that ironed out, and about 50 or 60 people began to email me, and they said, hey, we heard your voice. You should do your own podcast. This is amazing. The kind of stuff you've got on your blog. You need to start sharing more of your stuff. I heard your voice. You got a great voice. Why don't you do a podcast? And I'm like, oh my gosh, people want to hear me talk about Lost? Heck yeah. So I did some research. What is this thing called podcasting? And I invited my wife to join me. And by our third episode, we had 27,000 subscribers around the world. So the thing that I want to share with you here is that before I went to go work for my mom and dad in an insurance office, my dream, at least I thought at the time, was that one day I would pastor my own church. Now, that's not really, in essence, my dream. I was told that's what my dream meant. But what I had a dream of in 1996 is making a living, providing for my family by entertaining, educating, encouraging, and inspiring others, being of service, listening to what's going on in their lives, asking them powerful questions, helping them see things from a whole different perspective, helping them break free from their doubts and their unbelief and their limitations. This is what I had a dream of. And when I went and talked to my pastor, he's, oh, you're obviously called to be a pastor, just like me. And the church confirmed it. And I'm going down this route. So for more than a decade, I was an associate pastor of a church, and I'm working a family-run insurance agency owned by my mom and dad. And neither of those really called to my heart like what happened when I started getting emails as it related to this podcast. So the TV show, did you ever watch the TV show Lost, by the way?
I saw episodes, but I didn't watch the whole thing.
There were episodes titled Tabula Rasa, which is the whole idea of starting over with a clean slate. So one of the ideas behind the television show is they had all these different people, and they all had, let's just say, secrets from their life prior to crashing on the island. And here on the island, nobody knew anybody else's prior life. And so you could be whatever you want. You're getting a fresh start. Nobody's got preconceived ideas about who you are, what you're able to achieve, and all this other. And I love that. So I talked about the fact that it's like every day we could have a tabula rasa. You don't have to crash on a deserted island. You can just wake up one day and decide to completely change your entire direction in life. You can change your persona in life. And so I'm sitting there getting excited about this theme, right? Then there's an episode called All Good Cowboys Have Daddy Issues. And so they highlight on about 3 or 4 different characters, and it demonstrates their challenging relationships with their dads and how that's shaped some of their life circumstances. I get in behind the microphone and I'm sitting there saying, okay, I don't want to say anything disparaging about my dad, but it's just a fact that since I was born, he has been an alcoholic and a drug addict. And I have had some experiences where this resonates with me, what this story is showing. And here's how I've dealt with that. And this is how it's impacted the way that I think and feel. And I'm certainly not finished processing all the things that I've gone through, and I'm still facing challenges. But here's what I've learned. And so I'm sharing my heart authentically, transparently. And the themes go really deep, and even into the spiritual on some occasions. And I want you to hear this. I'm a guy in Northern Kentucky that outside of Northern Kentucky, only about 200 people have ever heard my name. But within just a few short months, I'm now reaching 60,000 people every single week who are hearing my voice from between 1 to 3 hours a week.
Wow.
And my email inbox was flooded with people saying, oh my gosh, Cliff, you told this story and that means so much to me. And they would write 5, 10 pages of email, just pouring their heart out. I've never had anybody who has a ministry background who would be willing to be so open and vulnerable. Can I ask you this question about your faith journey? And I'm sitting there literally having meaningful, faith-based, spiritual-based, family-based, financial-based conversations with people all over the planet that are deeper than any conversation I've ever had inside of the church, the institution. And I'm like, man, I wonder what life would be like if I could do this instead of pastoring a church and instead of working and taking over the family insurance agency. And I want to share something. Okay, I will demonstrate this to you, and you can just confirm that this right here is a big inbox. And so I'm holding up to the camera a big inbox, and what I'll do is I'll pull up a couple of things. One, this right here is a stack of postcards from all over the world with handwritten notes. There's about 100 postcards from all over the world because people asked, is there any way that I can send you a gift? And people would send gifts and checks and gift cards and all this other stuff, and they would send postcards. They began to send handwritten and typed up letters. So there's probably about 80 or so letters here. 3 of these letters, Peggy said, I chose not to commit suicide because of something you said on your podcast. I've got a stack of about 100 different thank you cards. And this just goes on, hundreds and hundreds. This is just the physical.
Wow.
But when it came to the digital, my email inbox was flooded with about 2,000 to 3,000 emails every single month. And the questions were almost always this. I would put out a podcast episode. I would talk and tell this story. And that story would have hundreds of people asking essentially the same question. Now, I have a heart and a desire to be of service to people. And I'm like, there's no way I can reply to every single one of these people individually. It got to the place where I could just barely read the emails. And if you sent me an email that was, if I printed it out, was more than 3 pages, I'm probably not going to be able to read that for about 2 or 3 months. But if your email is 1 to 3 paragraphs, I can then sort it and say, okay, here are the 5 main questions that have been asked by these few hundred people in the last week.
Wow.
And so that's what I began to do. And I began to create other podcasts on different topics that would allow me to talk about things that would be of interest. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about daddy issues and faith issues and technology issues in the Lost podcast. We would lose that audience in a heartbeat. So I created a podcast called Podcast Answer Man, where I would answer all your questions about how I'm doing all this podcast stuff. I created a podcast called Family from the Heart, where my wife and I would talk about family life. I created a podcast called Encouraging Others Through Christ, which is a faith-based podcast where it's all faith-based. You can't get upset if I'm talking about my relationship with God because that's what this show's about. I created a podcast called Business Tech Weekly, how to use technology in your business. I created a podcast called Social Media Serenity. How can we make use of social media to connect with other people and build genuine, authentic, real relationships online, but not be so obsessed that social media is pretty much eating up all the margin in our life? So I created all of these different shows, which, by the way, since 2005, I've published 48 different podcast shows, different topics, with 4,700 podcast episodes. The reason why I share all of that goes back to the question of why does Free the Dream happen? Because here's what happened. I had a dream of making a living, encouraging others. That's it. I want you to hear that. I had a dream of using my voice, whether it's pre-recorded and released as a podcast episode, whether it's me having an interview with Peggy here for her new podcast, whether it's me doing a live stream, or if I'm on stage at a conference, or whatever, or in a one-on-one coaching situation. My desire is that you're not coming here to hear me preach a sermon. You're not here so that I can get you coverage for your auto or home or life insurance and boat insurance and motorhome. You're here because you know that if you come to me, you're going to walk away with a lighter load. You're going to walk away with some of the burdens released off of your shoulders. You're going to come to me feeling stuck, but leave feeling unstuck. That's what I desire. That's what I want to do. And that's what I always wanted to do. And I realized that podcasting seemed to be the path. This online content creating world seemed to be the path that would allow me to do the fullest expression of who I feel called to be: entertaining, educational, encouraging, and inspirational. The only thing is, I had this dream, and my wife's a stay-at-home mom, and we have 3 young kids at the time. We're talking 2006, 2007. And I had this dream, man, what would life be like if I could just devote all of my work, all of my time devoted to creating content for these people and interacting and engaging with these people and making a powerful, positive, profound impact in people's lives. I wonder what life would be like. And here's the problem. I felt ashamed. That was the issue. I felt ashamed. I felt ashamed of that dream. I felt guilty to have that dream because here's what I had going for me. Back in I started dreaming this really hardcore in probably mid 2007. And we were heading towards a financial crisis, which ultimately did happen in 2008. But way before the actual crash came, there were already layoffs left and right. People were having a hard time finding jobs. People who had been working for companies for 20, 30, 40 years were being let go. And here's Cliff Ravenscraft, who is more profitable as an insurance agent than most anyone he ever grew up with, went to high school with, right? So I'm already in my hometown. At my age, I'm probably one of the most prosperous people as far as my career is concerned. Not the most, but certainly within the top 3%, top 2%. So I have an incredibly prosperous career as an insurance agent, and you cannot get more job security than working for mom and dad in a family-run insurance agency that started back in 1937 by your grandfather. So who are you to even think about putting your family's financial future at risk so that you could go do what? Your hobby? Cliff, people don't get paid to do their hobby. That people don't get paid to do this stuff. No, you need to be responsible. And by the way, who's saying this? My own head.
Right.
My own voice inside is telling me, you should be ashamed of yourself. This is ridiculous. Who do you think you are? Just get it out of your head. And all of this, by the way, do you remember that quote in high school? We had to read this book where it says, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And was what was going on. I'm incredibly financially prosperous. I have job security like no one else. And yet there's this quiet desperation. And the more I contemplate that this one path seems to be the path I was created for, that I was put on this earth to do this thing, and yet I feel guilty and ashamed to pursue it, I began having this desperation. My day job as an insurance agent became soul-sucking. Prior to podcasting, prior to all of this engagement with all of these people around the world, I thought insurance seemed to be the right fit. And maybe, just maybe one day, I might have the ultimate dream job as a head pastor with thousands of people in my church, which is not very likely given the denomination and stuff that I was in. One could dream, right? So that is why I created Free the Dream, because ultimately, I broke free from those limiting beliefs, those thoughts in my head, those voices in my head that told me that I should be ashamed, that I should feel guilty. And eventually I began to talk to some close personal friends about it. And they're like, oh gosh, definitely, Cliff, you have to do that. That's what you're meant to do. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And every time I had a conversation with a close friend who didn't judge me, who didn't have the same condemnation and criticism that I had of myself, I would come home and I would tell my wife, and she goes, yeah, that sounds right. You should do this. And I'm like, yeah, but no, there's no way I can do this. I had all of the doubts. And finally, I began talking about it in some of my more obscure podcasts, the ones where there's only about 1,000 people who listen to it. I can get by. I can talk about anything. So I got to tell you about this dirty little dream I've had about me leaving my career as an insurance agent. And really, I probably would never even dream of doing this until after my dad retires and blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing. What if I could do this? And then some of these people called entrepreneurs who were listening to my podcast said, Cliff, I definitely could see you doing this. I could see you. Matter of fact, I'd be happy to jump on a call and help you dream up like 5 different streams of income you could implement overnight. And I would have those conversations. I'd come home and I'd tell my wife. And then finally, one day I had an incredibly devastating day at the insurance office. And it's only devastating because of my mindset at the time. If I was armed with all of the mindset tools, techniques, and strategies that I have today, it would have just been another day. And I would have already had clarity about where I'm going in my life and just saw that it's a stepping stone. But at the time, it was a devastating day. And I'm like, oh, this is horrible. I hate my job. I hate my life. I hate this. And I came home and I was depressed. It's like, why do I have to do this? And my wife says, that's it. Tomorrow, you're going into your dad and you're putting in your notice. I want my husband back. The kids want their dad back. We both know that this is what you're meant to do in life. You've already started to generate some revenue from this thing on the side. You're already making $2,000 to $3,000 a month every single month consistently. Just imagine if you were to put the first 40 or 50 hours every week with your most motivation, the highest levels of energy. Imagine what you could accomplish. And she goes, you're going to do this. And she said, you know me, I don't have to work. I stay at home with the kids. Listen, if we have to sell our house and go rent, we'll do that. If I have to go get a job for a little while, I'll do that. But you are going in tomorrow and you're telling your dad you're done. And so I went in and I told him, I gave him a 90-day notice. And he's, gosh, I've been waiting for months for you to come in and tell me this. And so I'll stop there and check in with you, Peggy, because I could go on for this entire thing as an entire monologue. But I want to see if there's any... do you understand why I share all of that to say that this is why I created Free the Dream? Because I know there are other people who have dreams that they either, if they still have the dream, they feel dirty because they have the dream. They feel ashamed. They feel guilty. And maybe they've already given up on their dream because they've already talked themselves out of it.
So one question that pops up for me when you were telling the story is you talk about how you were very open and vulnerable and honest about sharing information that was somewhat negative about your father. What feelings did you have surrounding sharing that initially, and how did that affect your family? You sharing some negative things about your family.
Okay, so great thing for you to bring that up, because now that I'm telling this story, I realize, wait a second. So your dad owns this insurance agency and he's an alcoholic and a drug addict. So I'm glad you asked this question, because man, that one is interesting. So my biological dad is the dad who had a drug problem and alcohol problem his entire life. He died in 2015, but for his entire lifetime, he was a raging alcoholic and drug addict. And it was an incredibly challenging relationship. But my mom divorced him when I was really young and remarried to my then stepdad, who it was his father who started the insurance agency. So it's not like I'm sitting there revealing to the public that my business owner father who I work for is an alcoholic and a drug addict. So I just want to clarify that's not what's going on here. But my dad, and everybody who knew my dad, knew that he had issues. He had even some mental issues that even stemmed from those things. But the one thing that I will say is this. So first of all, let me just share this vulnerable story that when my biological dad passed away in 2015, my stepdad had always been my dad. Now, I had a relationship with both. One was at times very tumultuous, but I still had a relationship, and I loved my dad as much as any son could love his dad, regardless of what's going on. And I loved my stepdad, and I loved my stepdad as my dad, the same way. And since he was my dad, my stepdad was my dad since I was 5 years old. It was just a really close bond. So I just want to set the record straight there and tell you also, about a year after my biological dad passed away, my stepdad came to me and says, listen, I'd like to adopt you if you'd be interested.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I would definitely be down with that. The only thing is, would you be offended if after you adopt me that I maintain my last name? I don't want to change my last name to Lilly, which is his last name. And it's not that I've built an entire brand on my name. And not only that, but as much as I love you, I still have love and affection and respect for who my dad was, because
Right.
today I know he did the best he could with what he had to work with. And so I share all of that. And then also, just to answer specifically your question now, so that people don't think, oh my gosh, your dad's an insurance agent, he owns this agency, and you're out there outing him in your podcast. So I want to say that when I did talk about my biological dad being a drug addict and an alcoholic, all I said is that I know what it's like to have a parent who struggles with alcohol, who struggles with drugs. And I will tell you that I've had some painful experiences as a child that quite frankly, no child should ever have to. I've witnessed things, I've seen things that no child should ever witness or see. And I'm not going to go into great detail. I love my dad, but I will tell you that there are times where I resonate with what's being shown in this story, just like this person. I can understand how somebody can make the decisions based upon how they think and feel about their relationship with their dad. And that's about as much as I shared about my dad then. Now, since his passing, I've shared a great deal more in public content, but only after coming to a complete, maybe is it 180, a complete about face of understanding who my dad is. So it wasn't until after he died in May of 2015. It was June of 2016 that I began to really go incredibly in depth into human psychology and philosophy, metaphysical relationships, and all of this other stuff, and understanding how our mind and our brain works and how we perceive the world. And I can tell you right now, most children who grew up having traumatic relationships with a parent in a scenario like this, they would have repressed memories of some of the more horrific things that have happened in their life. I don't know how it happened, but I did not have that. I actually had repressed memories of all the good things that happened with my dad. And all I could remember was all the things I hated about my experience. And throughout most of my biological dad's time when he was alive, I would use all of the negative stuff to give me the excuse and the moral high ground to not want to participate in his life as much as possible. And so I think I use that as a coping mechanism to say, look, no, you've done all of these things. I'm keeping a record over here, blah, blah, blah. But after he died, I went through some incredibly powerful grief and guilt and shame. In fact, I think it was the last time I've experienced guilt and shame after he died. But that really set me free because it started to help me uncover what was going on. It helped me to start exploring, why do I feel the way that I feel? What was my relationship with my dad? And one night I began just like having flashes of memories, like things that I'd never thought of until since that I had them, but just maybe 100 or 200 different memories. I completely lived those as if I was in the moment, and they were all wonderful, joyous, loving memories of my dad, where he definitely, all of them were repressed and locked up and chained away until this experience where it's, oh my gosh, my dad really did love me. My dad, sure, he struggled. He had his habits, he had his addictions, and it caused him to do, think, and say and act a lot of really terrible things and all this other stuff. But man, I remember now just how many times he tried.
Wow.
And so I share all of that because I think it's valuable to hear how that plays into the overall story. And it is something about our mindset. It is about freeing our dreams, and it's freeing ourselves from the limiting beliefs that even come from those traumas that we experience in our life, especially in our early childhood.
I can't believe those memories just came back to you. What a gift that was to be able for that to come back to you. And
if you're open to a metaphysical experience, I'll even share one thing even way deeper than that.
Absolutely.
I think it was during the pandemic. It was January. I know it was January 20th because that's my birthday. January 20th, 2021. I spent 3 days with my biological dad. Now, I remember I told you he died in 2015, but I went to bed on the 20th, and right around 1 o'clock in the morning or so, I'm starting to have this dream, and my dad comes, and my dad's in this all white robes, and he's glowing white, and he has this red hair, and he's got these dark sunglasses on. And the craziest thing is, my dad and I are hanging out, and we never once speak an audible word to one another. No words are exchanged between us. But we spoke to one another nonstop and had incredible experiences for 3 full days. Like, even in this moment, I can imagine and see in my mind's eye some of the things we did during those 3 days and the conversations we had without a word being spoken through our mouths. It's just like there was no need to use words. We were just, the only way I could say is we were one. We knew and understood each other. And I began to apologize to him. But as I was apologizing to him, he says, there's no need to apologize to me whatsoever. And he wanted to apologize to me, and I'm like, there's no need to apologize. We're okay. This is awesome. And he basically came. He says, listen, I just wanted to come and wish you a happy birthday. I woke up 2 hours later. I had 3 days with my dad, and he came, and I woke up, and I grabbed my handwritten journal at the time. This is not the one. It's over there because I have them by date. But anyway, I have my journal, and I wanted to make sure I literally wrote down in detail, word for word, every single detail that I could remember from those 3 days with my dad. And as I'm writing, I'm literally crying. Tears are falling on my pages. And I wanted to document this. And I made the tears fall down onto the pages of my journal. And I smudged the ink and I circled it. And I said, this is how I will know that this was not an imagined experience.
Wow. You talked about your wife, Stephanie, and how she pushed you to move forward in your dream. What is that like, having her not only just support you in your dreams, but to push you towards them?
It is incredibly awesome and such a huge blessing. And I know that not everyone has this, and I feel for everyone who does not. And I think there are some things that can be done to help in those situations. But for me, it was a godsend. I really never dealt with a lot of depression except for right around Thanksgiving to Christmas before I became full-time self-employed. But I had the biggest mood swings that I had ever imagined in my life. I had the highest highs, which, don't get me started. You see me on a high, it's like lookout world that literally could move mountains. That's how I get when I'm at my highest high. But I also had my lowest lows. I'm like, who am I? What am I doing? This is crazy. I don't have what it takes. What did I think? This is crazy. Why am I doing? And I was afraid and worried. And of course, this is all during the 90 days leading up to me leaving the day job. So I'm sitting there having a day at the end of the insurance work. I come home and it's time to eat dinner with the family. And then I'm sitting on the couch watching some television with my wife, Stephanie. And all of a sudden I'm feeling great. And then all of a sudden this wave of dread came out of nowhere. Now, I couldn't pinpoint what it was at the time. But I know now that I know a lot about neuroassociations, and I know about anchors, and I know about triggers. And what happened was there was a phrase that was spoken during a television show. And that phrase unlocked something and caused my subconscious mind to release a bunch of thoughts and beliefs and stuff like this. And it started, and next thing, I'm not on the couch with my wife anymore. I'm off in some distant imaginary horror film. It's as though my wife is sitting there watching, let's just say it was a sitcom. I don't know what we were watching, but because I don't remember. But in my mind, I'm literally living a horror film in my mind about how terrible things are going to go. And I'm like, where is this coming from? And I just overwhelmed with fear, anxiety, doubt about my decision. Finally, I began talking about this in my podcast that hardly anybody subscribed to. When I say that, about 890 or so people. And so I started to share that I was experiencing this. And one person says, oh, why don't you just go talk to your dad and say, listen, I'd like to work here part-time and then you do this while you're building. It seems to me that would solve your problem. So I went to my stepdad and I said, Dad, how about I work here Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and that would give me every Tuesday and Thursday and the weekends to build my business. And slowly I'll be able to work this up. That will release me from all this anxiety, fear, worry, and doubt. Now that's not what I told him, but that's what I'm thinking, right? And he says, no, it's either you go all in here or you go all in on your dream. There's no half butting it either way. So it's either you're all in here or you're all in there. The only thing I can tell you is that if you go all in on your dream and you fail, you will never regret it.
Oh.
If you go all in here and give up on your dream, you're going to regret it.
Wow.
And he said this, he says, you might have all of the fears in the world, but if you have the courage to move in the direction of your dream, you cannot fail.
That's amazing.
And so January 1st, I left and I had worked around the clock 7 days a week for 9 months without taking a single day off. I worked about 12 to 14 hours a day. I was still, by the way, doing associate pastor stuff on the weekends on top of this. And after 9 months, I finally decided, you know what? I'm going to start taking 1 day a week off. I'm going to start taking Sundays off. And the only way I made up for that was by committing I will work additional hours the other 6 days. So I was working about 20-hour days at this point, work just 4 hours of sleep, up, get straight to work, 20 hours, and go back to bed. I would eat all of my meals at my desk because if I'm not profitable, if I'm not putting food on the table, if I'm not bringing in money, then I better be doing something because I'm not worthy of rest. This was my mindset at the time. This is why Free the Dream exists. So what happened was after 9 months, I mean, for the first 9 months, this is something that's not in Free the Dream, by the way. But how did I live for 9 months with no income? Here's how. This is how it worked. January, February, and March, I lived off of my December income from being an insurance agent. Then April, May, and June, I lived off of my Christmas bonus from the last time I got paid at the insurance office. And then for 3 more months, I did the unthinkable. I went to my financial planner guy and said, how much money do I have in here in my retirement account? And I said, how much would it cost for me to take out this amount of money so that I could have $15,000? He says, it cost you $25,000. I said, take out $25,000, hold the money for the taxes, hold the money for the penalties, and just give me $15,000 net. He goes, no, Cliff, this is the worst decision. Just do it. It's my money, right? He's yeah. And so that's how we lived for the next 3 months. Finally, and by the way, we were on food stamps during this entire time as well. You talk about feeling guilt and shame. My belief system about food stamps and being on government assistance was not a good mindset. And so I felt guilty and ashamed by that. And finally, when it all came down to it, 9 months in, I'm starting to not only pay for the business always paid for the health insurance, the business always paid for the software, the tools, and it paid for my CPA to handle all of the financial stuff. But no paycheck to Cliff Ravenscraft until finally September. And then actually October, November, December, I had a paycheck each month. But when it was all said and done after taxes, I made $11,000 net income after my first year of business. And again, that first year, because of all of that roller coaster of emotions, super high highs, incredibly low anxiety, depression, worry, fear, all of these things. And all of that just destroyed my physical body. And I ended up in the hospital in January 2009 and almost died as a result of massive gallstones. They had to take out my gallbladder, everything. And that's when I began to say, okay, I know that I'm on the right path. I know that this is what I feel called to do. I know that this is my purpose in this world. I know this dream is not here for no other reason than the fact that I'm meant to do this work. But there are very clear roadblocks, obstacles in my way that are keeping me from being profitable, from doing this in a way that's healthy. And I know that it has nothing to do with my skill, talent, or ability. I know that it has nothing to do with my gift of communication. I've got the thousands of emails. At this point, I'm reaching hundreds of thousands of people around the world. It's just that in my mind, I have all of these messed up beliefs about money. I have all of these messed up beliefs about how you add value to people's lives and how you should get paid. I still had this thing where I felt guilty charging people for something that I still considered to be fun and a hobby in my mind. And that's when I began studying personal and professional development books, things like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, things like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, books like The 4-Hour Workweek with Timothy Ferriss, books like Secrets of the Millionaire Mind by T. Harv Eker, and books like Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. I would just read a book, oh gosh, I can't forget, 48 Days to the Work You Love by Dan Miller, and Thou Shalt Prosper by Rabbi Daniel Lapin. I just began to immerse myself into the study of how do people succeed in this world financially by doing what they love. And through this, I began to completely reprogram what I believe about this world, what I believe about money, what I believe about relationships, what I believe about value, what I believe about work. And over time, even what I believe about God and what God's desire for me is and all this other stuff, I began to question everything I believed. And that's how Free the Dream came about. I'm like, I want to help other people learn how to overcome these beliefs, because today I'm at a place where there was 18 months during the height of the pandemic. For the second half of 2020 and all of 2021, I worked 3 days a week, 12 hours during those three days. I had 2 paid mastermind groups and I had 3 one-on-one coaching clients.
Oh.
I made $30,000 a month every single month for 18 months straight, working 12 hours a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Wow. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
That's really, I think, that space of rest where we're not getting it, that space of allowing ourselves to learn from others and to glean from others, and all that space that is required in order to grow. I think it really does hold so many of us back, and the mindset that we have, it's astronomical to be able to get your mind into a space where you can think properly and grow properly. What would you say to the girl? She's laying on the floor and she's hearing this podcast and she doesn't believe. She sees Cliff Ravenscraft on a pedestal somewhat, and she doesn't believe that she can grow to the level that you're at today. What would you say to that?
I would say I've been where you are, because I was in the hospital after working literally 7 days a week for 9 months, then 6 days a week, working 80, 90 hours a week, creating thousands of podcast episodes, serving hundreds of thousands of people, and only made $11,000 net income. I want you to hear that. I made $11,000 after taxes to completely care for a family of 5. Think about that. So I have been in that scenario. But what got me was I looked at the people who were on pedestals. I looked at people like Dan Miller, who was an early mentor of mine. And it seemed like this guy is just, he seems like he's financially wealthy. It seems like he has lots of margin. He goes on lots of cruises with his wife. He does lots of traveling. He only writes for a living and maybe does a couple of interviews here and there, teaches a workshop or a conference every now and then. But man, this guy just does what he loves for a living. And I read his book, 48 Days to the Work You Love. And that really changed how I believe about work. And so my recommendation is find somebody who is living the life that you want to live, but who also has a story where they understand, where you know that they've been and struggled with what you're struggling with. And what I can say is, I can't say that I've experienced everything that you're experiencing, but I have been at the lowest lows. I have actually learned that we can get by on no money for a couple of months, and we could be practically homeless, it feels like at times. But I will say this, if you have a dream, and this is the key, if you have a dream, that dream is there for a reason. And one of the reasons why insurance was soul sucking for me was because it kept me from doing, with a majority of my best time, effort, and energy, what I was most gifted at in this world. There was a time when I loved my job as an insurance agent before I discovered podcasting, before I discovered this ability to create content and distribute it to the world. Because before I discovered that, I was actually having these meaningful, powerful conversations with clients. I was the first person who people called sometimes when their daughter was just involved in a tragic car accident, or their house is burning to the ground, or a tornado just blew their home away. I was the first person on a lot of calls for people where they needed somebody with my gifting, my talents, my abilities to show up and be a meaningful, positive, powerful influence in their life in that moment, to help them get beyond where they're at in this stuck state. And so I loved it for a while. But what I recognize is that, okay, it's nice that I get to tap into this about once every 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 months. But I have the opportunity to do this seemingly every hour of the day, every day of my life, if I choose to do. And that for me that's my dream. And if you have a dream about what you'd like to do with your life, you might be struggling with all sorts of beliefs. There's just no way to make money from that. There's just no way that I could do this. I've got too many obligations. There are too many commitments. You don't understand how I feel physically. I had practically all of those things. And I will say that it is, and if it were just me and my incredibly privileged life, and I recognize, even though I have some trauma from my past and in childhood, and I've had some challenging circumstances in my transition into full-time self-employment, I realize I still live an incredibly privileged life. I do recognize this. So if you're still not convinced that it's possible for you, I encourage you to go read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Read the entire thing. The first part of it will tell you his biographical experience of being in Auschwitz and I think 3 other German death camps during World War II. His wife was murdered. His parents were murdered in the gas chambers. And yet this man made it through because he found meaning, because he found purpose, because he had a dream, because he found a calling in his life. And he refused to let his dream die, is what happened. And then he created he was already a psychologist before he entered into the Auschwitz camps, but he developed what he called logotherapy. And it is an incredibly powerful form of psychology that does talk about our main purpose in life is to find meaning, to find what drives, and to find that dream within yourself and to be committed to setting it free. So I would say, find people who have encouraging, inspiring stories, who have been at the lowest of lows, and against seeming all odds, they were relentless and persistent in making their dreams become reality.
I think you inspire me, and I'm so happy that I was able to have a conversation with you today, and you were able to share with my audience and encourage them so much. Is there anything else that you would like to leave my audience with? These women, they're amazing women, and they've been through a lot of things, and they feel like they're stuck. I think that they are amazing, and they are going to get through this and conquer life and pursue their dreams. What do you have to say for them?
There are a couple of things that I want to say. If you do feel stuck, I want to say congratulations. I think it's awesome. And if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired in this stuck state, it's great. Your obstacle is going to be your greatest gift at some point into the future. One day you will see your experiences for the gift that they are. And I know that can be incredibly challenging to hear. My wife, by the way, is very public. She was sexually abused as a toddler by her stepdad. And so I know that even that, she has such a powerful way of showing up in the lives of women who have been sexually abused. And she's even able to see how, wow, getting through that, finding healing, recovering from all of those limiting beliefs and all of the pain and suffering that she caused herself to live through, repeating it over and over again in our life, learning these tips, techniques, and strategies for basically freeing yourself from the cycle and pattern of suffering of saying, this is what happened, this is what I'm focused on, this is what it means. And as a result of that, this is how I think and feel. And of course, that gets you into that stuck state. You stay in the same cyclical pattern. And all you have to do is, for just a moment, change what you're focused on. And if you change what you're focused on, you will change in the moment what you're feeling. Eventually, you're going to need to go back and find that thing that's been causing you so much trouble, that's gotten you into that stuck state. But the great news is that you can go back, you can focus on it, and you can rewrite your past. You can change your past experience with new information today. See, the thing is, when we're 7 years old or younger, we don't have a critical thinking mind. But all of the conclusions we came to then are hardwired as beliefs inside of our subconscious mind. But we can go and dismantle that wiring, and we can change those beliefs with new information and with a critical thinking mind today. And that's why I encourage you to either go through some materials that will help you through this. I know that Peggy just went through the Free the Dream online course over at freethedreamcourse.com, and work with a coach. Find somebody who has gone through this, has a lot of experience working with people on dismantling some of those stuck states that you find yourself in. It's incredibly powerful. If you could just take what it is you're focusing on and come up with a new meaning as to what it means for you and how this is actually going to work for your benefit moving forward. And that one day, while you would never wish this to happen again, while you would never wish it on anyone else, if you had the opportunity to go back and change it, I promise you, ultimately, one day you would never go back and rob yourself of the opportunity of having had that experience because of who it's made you today into the powerful a person of service and value that you can reach and resonate with people that you would have never been able to do with us or otherwise. So I would say definitely involve yourself into the story of other people who have gone through what you're going through. Learn from them. How did they heal? How have they recovered? And be inspired by their story of how they've taken the focus off of what is this doing for me, but how can I use this and be of value to others? And when we are struggling to feel connected, how can I connect with others? How can I make them feel more connected? If you're struggling because you don't feel like you're receiving love from anyone, ask yourself the question, how can I take who I am and love someone else? How can I make them feel love from me? Whatever you're missing from yourself, make a commitment to give it to others. These are the kinds of things I talk about, by the way, in my Free the Dream online course. And if you want, I would encourage you to check out mindsetanswerman.com/free and get the opening keynote address to the Free the Dream course for free. It's a 1-hour video titled All Beliefs Have Consequences, and it is the first step of unlocking the padlock that's on the cage that's holding your dreams inside.
Thank you so much. Your words are so powerful, and the advice that you're giving today is going to truly change someone's life. I hope they all get the Free the Dream course and allow it to benefit and change their life and put the things in the course into action and start taking actions today. The way that you teach to step by step walk daily towards your goal and your dreams. It's powerful. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me and letting me glean so much personally from you and your story and your life. It's so encouraging. It's amazing, and thank you immensely.
Well, it is my honor, Peggy, my privilege. Thank you so much for this opportunity. If one person's life is positively impacted, it will have been worth it. And I'm honored to have been here.
Thank you.
Hey, friends. Thank you for listening. You're now done with step 1 of growing together at the Mindset School. Head over to themindsetschool.net and grab my free download where I share 5 tips when you can't hold it together anymore and continue your journey to smiling authentically from the inside out.
If you enjoyed this amazing overcoming story and you want to hear more overcoming stories from the Mindset School podcast, comment, like, subscribe, and most importantly, share with someone else that could use an overcoming story of encouragement.